It's good to be back with you after being away. We began a new series the last time I was with you, 2 weeks ago, on the revelation of Jesus Christ, the first 3 words of the apocalypse in the original language. It's called the apocalypse. We no longer call it the apocalypse because it's such a great word, but it's no longer a really good word because it's really been, I said last time, bastardized in the modern pop culture. What does apocalypse mean now? End of the world. Holocaust. Terrors. Massive 9.0 earthquakes. What else does apocalypse mean? Zombies. Oh, yeah, that's right. Yeah, they're like the living undead, or strange kind of resurrection. Right. Nuclear war. One other thing? Ragnarok. Yes, right. There's apocalypse in the Thor Ragnarok. Yeah, fantasy. That kind of gets us a bit there, so catastrophe of cosmic proportions is what we think of, but the original meaning of apocalypse was simply revealing. So we read this morning, the revealing of Jesus. Apocalypse meant pulling back the curtains, the unveiling, so taking the cover off, helping us to see through something to the reality behind the unreality. So yes, this is the apocalypse. The unveiling of Jesus Christ. And today's text is the first of, guess how many unveilings of Jesus? Just guess. Yeah, you're right. Of course. 7. Remember, Revelation is full of symbols, not statistics. Don't use numbers as statistics. It's always symbols. And 7's a favorite one. For many of us, when we really start to dig into this book and we discover Revelation is actually an apocalypse, an unveiling of Jesus Christ, that it never intended to be a blow-by-blow account of the future, well, that discovery can feel like a bit of a letdown. Here, everybody's been telling me that we have this intricately detailed blueprint of the future. God's own detailed master plan for us, God's insiders, right? But now you're telling me it's not that at all? Well, that kind of blows. So I used to think that. What makes this masterpiece at the end of the Bible so special, so powerful, is how it gives us this precise, blow-by-blow vision of the future. All the end of the world action. But now I'm saying that that's not what makes this book so special. Not what gives this final book its power. So what is the point of Revelation, of the apocalypse? What does make this special? What's the point of all of these crazy visions anyway? That's what I want to ask you with you this morning. If Revelation does not give us this special clairvoyant power into future events, then what is Revelation's true and better power? All right, let's look. Verse 9. And if you have your Bibles out, or have a Bible with you, it's a great time to take it out now and turn to Revelation 1. If you don't, there are Bibles back there. Somebody can go and grab one for you, or you can just get up and pick one up on your own if you want. They're back there. Okay, verse 9. Notice how powerless John must be feeling here, how helpless he must be feeling. From other historical accounts, we know that John, along with Jesus' mother, Mary, lived for many years in Ephesus, that first of the 7 churches that Faith heroically made her way through. Well done, Faith. And he was their pastor in Ephesus. Now we know from Acts, who was the actual founder of the church? Who planted the church in Ephesus? Paul. But we don't read of him ever visiting any of the other 6 churches, Sardis, Thyatira, Philadelphia, those. So those are probably churches that got planted out from Ephesus. Maybe John planted those other 6. They'd be his churches. He's like their shepherd over those churches. But now it's the 90s. The real 90s, not the 1990s. And Paul is long dead. Back in the 60s, he was beheaded in Rome by Nero. Peter, too, got martyred in Rome, crucified upside down in the 60s. Thank you. Just leave that up. I'm going to get to it here shortly. So Peter said, I don't want to be, he was going to get crucified. He said, I'm not worthy to be crucified like my Lord. Turn the cross upside down. The first apostle martyred, do you know who he was? The first of the 12? Yeah, James, John's other brother, the other son of Zebedee. We read about that in Acts 12. He was martyred by who? Herod, right? In Jerusalem in about 44 AD. Thomas laid down his life for Christ. Do you know where? Yeah, Kerala, we think, in India. In the 70s, about 20 years ago, Andrew, Simon, Nathaniel, historic tradition tells us that all of them met a pretty violent end. All died as martyrs, witnesses, speakers of truth for Jesus. And still the Church of Jesus was just blasting out across the empire, growing by leaps and bounds, because the blood of the martyrs is, you know what Tertullian said? He said it's seed. The seed of the church. So the authorities decided not to make this last apostle standing one more martyr. Instead, they just dumped John unceremoniously out there in the Mediterranean. There's Patmos. Pile of rocks. Uninhabitable, basically. And today, it's first day of the week, verse 10. What was known in the early church as the day of the resurrection. What's John doing out there on Sunday? What did our text say he's doing? He's in the Spirit. He's praying. He's meditating. What do you think he's meditating about? I mean, he might be worrying, right? Maybe he's feeling really anxious and helpless about those 7 little churches. Here he is, off there in Patmos, quite a distance from Ephesus, Smyrna, Pergamum, Thyatira, Sardis, Philadelphia, and Laodicea. And if you're going to, as we read ahead, we're going to see those churches are really struggling. They're really tempted. They're so compromised. They're really weak. In fact, next week, we're going to see that a few of them are in danger of simply disappearing, of complete apostasy. And what can John do? Nothing. He's in exile. So maybe there's anxious thoughts that are circling round and round, and he just can't get them out of his head. They're going round and round and round. You know what it's like, right? But that wouldn't be exactly meditating in the Spirit, would it? In the Bible, meditating is like a dog chewing on a bone, is the image in the Psalms especially. It's like a cow ruminating food up and down, stomach to stomach. Just chewing, gnawing on this bone and not letting it go, working it over. God's word gets worked over and over and over again. That's meditating. And in fact, we know that that's exactly what John is doing here as he's meditating. How do we know that what John is doing is meditating on all the rest of the Bible, on the stories of Jesus, and especially the Old Testament? How do we know that? Because Revelation is all that. The book of Revelation has 405 verses, but scholars have gone through and picked out all of the allusions, all the references from the rest of the Bible, from Jesus' teachings, and especially from the Old Testament, and found approximately 800. There's probably more. That would be like 2 references per verse. The book of Revelation is nothing new. It gives us no new information. It simply puts the whole Bible story in a brand new way that kind of wakes us up and gets us thinking in a new way. Something like the movie that came out earlier this year. Do you remember that movie? Ready Player One. Anybody see the movie? Oh, good. A couple of us have seen the apocalyptic movie. So what movies were referenced in Ready Player One? It would be easier to say what movies were not referenced. Minecraft, well, that's not a movie, but Batman, the Joker, Friday the 13th, Star Trek, Street Fighter, Tron, The Hulk, Spider-Man, Back to the Future, King Kong, Jurassic Park, Battlestar Galactica, Alien, GoldenEye, Superman, Looney Tunes, Space Invaders, Asteroids, War of the Worlds, you saw all these in there, right? Good. I don't know half these movies, but Star Wars, Overwatch, Beetlejuice, Mortal Kombat, even some games, Citizen Kane, Monty Python, Mad Max, and dozens more. I stopped the list there. It's like the revelation of pop culture, really, the apocalypse of pop culture. Steven Spielberg, I guess, was having a lot of fun. So, John is meditating on the whole Bible story. He knows the whole Bible really, really well, it seems. It's like it's right in his bones. Even better than Alex knows movies. But Alex, you didn't see Ready Player One. Actually, yeah, he knows them even better than Alex. So, now let's listen to this vision with all of its allusions. John, while I was meditating in the Spirit, I heard a voice behind me like a trumpet. Allusion? Where does that come from? Who heard the first voice like a trumpet? Moses did. Exodus 19. God's voice sounds like a trumpet blast. And what does Moses get? The Big Ten, right? The gift of the 10 Commandments. What we call the 10 Commandments. They're not called that actually in the Bible. They're just God's words, God's gift. So John's like, Patmos, Sinai, I'm on Sinai again, and he turns. Now, you're going to discover that this is one of the most oft-repeated and most important tropes in the whole of the book of Revelation. I heard, I turned, and then I saw. Now, this is the first one in the book of Revelation, and I'm going to keep coming back to them. Okay? I heard the voice of God. I'm back on Mount Sinai. Here comes God speaking to me. Big Ten. I turn, and there in front of my eyes is the living Word, the Word made flesh. Jesus, the person that I know. God's Big Ten is now a person. It's this big switch. So we could go over in fine detail every single facet of what John saw when he saw Jesus. But remember, this is poetry. This is a portrait of what we're meant to be caught up in. And I'm stunned and shocked and overwhelmed by this glorious vision of Jesus. So we're not to focus too much on just all the separate parts. Still briefly, what does John see first? You're going to notice he starts kind of on the outside and works his way in until we get Jesus right in the center. What's the first thing John sees? 7 lamps. Actually, it's 7 lamps on one lampstand. A lot of the translations get that wrong. What do we call that? What was in that synagogue yesterday that was shot up? And in any synagogue? Menorah, right? Yeah, it's a menorah. Where does that come from? What's the illusion? 7 lamps on one lampstand. It's from the tabernacle, though it doesn't really mention there's 7. It actually comes from a little prophet, a little book, maybe not a little prophet, a little book of the prophets called, anybody know? Zechariah chapter 4. I saw a golden lampstand with 7 lamps on it. Now, of course, I know we all think of this, the modern, next picture here, the modern menorah, right? There it is. That's what we're thinking. But what Zechariah and John would actually have seen as an ancient lamp like this. The next one. So this lampstand, the basin is filled with olive oil. The wicks would run up then from the oil reservoir into each of the pinches around the brim of the lampstand, drawing up the oil of the Spirit. And then they're each lit, 7 flames, each of those flames representing one of the churches. Yeah. And somehow standing, maybe he's swimming, doesn't actually say standing, but somehow standing there right in the middle of the 7 flames is Jesus. So John may be far away. He's sent off in exile out there in the Mediterranean, or in the Aegean Sea, actually, part of the Mediterranean. But the real shepherd, the true pastor, the real shepherd is right there in the middle of the lampstands, taking care of them. What exactly does Jesus look like? First, his clothes, verse 13. Long white robe and a special golden sash around his chest up here. He's dressed like a priest dresses like this, exactly. One of the few white-collar vocations in the ancient world. Almost everybody else wore their sash or their belt around their waist, right? You gird up, they said, gird up your loins, bring up your robes and tie them kind of up here so you could work. But a priest, one of the priest's jobs is, of course, to tend to all the lamps in the temple, taking care of the lamps as he takes care of the people, shepherding the lamps, shepherding the people. Jesus is our priest, taken care of. He's the shepherd. John, they're going to be okay. Don't worry about your 7 little churches, even if you are banished to Patmos. And now finally we get the actual description of Jesus. And let's go again to Eugene Peterson's version again. I said at the beginning of this service, it's been quite a week. It has been Monday. Of course, Eugene Peterson, whose translation we've been reading, passed away. And so we remember this remarkable shepherd to shepherds. He really was a pastor. I often felt like a lamb of Eugene Peterson's. Anyway, here's how he puts it. Hair, a blizzard of white. Eyes, pouring fire blades. Feet, furnace-fired bronze. Voice, a cataract, a waterfall, thundering. Right hand holding the 7 stars, which are these 7 angels of the churches. So there's this sort of angelic protection as well. We'll get to that later on in the series. Mouth, the sharp biting sword. And then the whole face is, I liked how he said it, a perigee, I don't know how you say that word, but a sun that's as close as it can possibly get. Brilliant sun. By the way, where is this from? What's the allusion all here? What book? Do you know? One of John's favorite books. Daniel. Yeah, it's Daniel. Straight out of Daniel. Listen to Daniel 7. God, the Ancient of Days, sat down on his throne. His robes were white as snow, his hair white like wool. Wait. John is saying that Jesus looks like God, is the Ancient of Days? And he's walking among the lampstands, not just sitting on his throne? Yeah, that's exactly what John is saying. Daniel continues, chapter 10. One like a son of man was dressed in linen with a belt of fine gold. His body was like topaz, face like lightning, his eyes like flaming torches, his arms and his legs like the gleam of burnished bronze, and his voice here like the sound of a multitude. Straight out of Daniel. What a portrait of Jesus. We don't have any physical descriptions of Jesus in the gospel. Don't you wish sometimes that we would know what Jesus looked like? We'd have some description of what he looked like. You know, he was Asian, right? So often, he's always painted as if he's European, but he's not. I remember in the little Akiane, Kramaric, I think is how you say her name. She's just a few months older than our eldest, older than Joshua. I think she's 24 now. But at age 8, I was pastor down in Peace Mennonite when her first painting came out of Jesus. She received her first vision actually at age 4, but she painted him in a number of different ways. But the very first one is this one. Yes, there we go. Good. That stunning portrait of Jesus was her first one at age 8. That's amazing. And then Akiane really got the world's attention a few years later when 4-year-old Colton Burpo, remember him? Of the Heaven is for Real fame? Remember that? He comes back from a near-death experience. They thought he had died, and he came back and he said, I saw Jesus. And everybody said, what did he look like? And he tries to describe, and they start showing him pictures. And finally they showed him Akianes and said, that's him, that's who I saw. Well, of course, the truth is that we do not actually know what Jesus looked like then or now. I'm not sure that that's who he will look like when we meet him. But even this vision, Revelation 1, is not a physical portrayal of Jesus. Some have tried to make it that. 500 years ago, Albert Dürer famously made a whole series of woodcuts on the book of Revelation. Here's his first vision of Jesus here. Working good. Okay? You got the lampstands wrong, obviously. But that's just grotesque, isn't it? I hope I don't meet that guy one day. He tried to physically illustrate what John was telling us. Now here's a more modern attempt. Even worse. You see what John was doing? He wasn't giving us a photo of Jesus, but a vision of Jesus' true self. Not the outer Jesus, but the inner Jesus. Something more true than a realistic portrait of the outer Jesus. Something more like my artist neighbor, Deirdre's surrealistic paintings. Yesterday, I put this together, Deirdre, before I knew you were coming this morning. So yesterday I met Deirdre in the hall, and she said, I'd really like to come to your church. And I said, that's really exciting. Why don't you come to more? I'm talking about you. I've never mentioned you before, I promise. But here's a painting, one of your last paintings. Oh no, I've got these mixed up. I'll show them later. All right. Deirdre is kind of in the same category as this painter. Do you know who painted that? This was painted at age 14 by Picasso, the old fisherman. He was age 14. He was a childhood prodigy as well. But that's not the Picasso we know. That's not the Picasso who's famous, is it? Who's the Picasso we know? It's this one. All those three portraits were done when he was young. Can go to the next one? That's the Picasso we know. The Picasso who paints two faces in one. Right? Or the next one. This is the Picasso we know. The surrealist Picasso, not the realist Picasso. Picasso wanted to capture a person's true self, often by depicting their facial features from two angles, all within a single frame. Picasso painted the inner life. He painted eyes of grief, like the weeping woman. Passion, he painted. Violence and pain and eyes of fire. Something like John in the Apocalypse. Picasso and John and Deirdre are all about revealing, about apocalypse. Picasso eschewed models, painting from memory and from imagination. That's what John is doing. He's remembering, he's meditating, he's painting with imagination. He's painting for our imagination, a Picasso, for our ears and for our eyes. I think I do still have some pictures of Deirdre's here. Yes, so you'll notice the endangered species coming out. I'm not even going to try to expound on, you're meant to take these in. Maybe in our question period in a couple minutes, Deirdre, you can tell us what these are about. There's a few more here. Now, I know you're a dog person, not a cat person, so that's interesting to me. I have no idea what the dog quartet musicians are, again, representing Deirdre. We really should have in our class. And finally, I did one more. These are all on Deirdre's website. The child birds here. They're beautiful, aren't they? And really great, honored to live across from an artist. So, again, this painting is bringing us into something more real than a photo. Thanks. We can just turn that off now. Okay, what does this surreal vision do to John in verse 17? Wipes him out, doesn't it? Devastates him. He falls faint at Jesus' feet. If John felt helpless before, now he's paralyzed, he's powerless, he's feeling utterly undone. And then what does Jesus do? Does what he does all over the Gospels. Jesus is constantly touching people in the Gospels, and he puts his hand on John and says, "Write, John, write a letter. Let your churches see what you have seen. Help them to catch a bit of the vision of me." And sure enough, the next 2 chapters, which you'll be looking at next week, are all shaped and they're all formed and informed by this great and glorious opening vision that John has of Jesus. Next Sunday, unfortunately, I have to be away again. But you're going to get to spend some time with these 7 messages to the 7 churches, and each one of these 7 messages you're going to see comes out of this vision. And then you're going to give me some guidance for the sermon of the following Sunday, November 11th. What do you think might be Jesus' message, not to Sardis, Thyatira, and Laodicea, but the church of Jesus, the message of Jesus to the church of Chinatown. Remember those Choose Your Own Adventure books? Well, November 11 will be your Choose Your Own Sermon. Details to follow in this Tuesday's Timbits. All right. Before I wrap this up, I'm going to take about 5 more minutes and wrap it all up. But before that, I've promised that we'll take some time for some questions each time. Maybe you have questions for Deirdre and her art. Anybody have any questions or any responses to this vision of Jesus? And then I'm going to get at the big question I asked at the beginning. Where's the power in this? Why is this vision powerful? Yeah, Sandra. I know, it's that question. I know, it's so carefully and literarily crafted. One day I'm going to show you how the whole book of Revelation is a chiasm. Have we talked about chiasms before? This unbelievably detailed structure that brings everything into the middle to chapter 11 and chapter 12 of the book of Revelation. It's all built in this perfect mirrored literary structure, which looks like there's a ton of work that goes into it literarily before it's given to us. John is obviously extremely gifted as an artist. But that doesn't mean he didn't see something, he didn't hear something as he was meditating. I think he did. He heard a voice. What that was like, how he heard a voice, I wish I knew the answer to that question. I was hoping you would know the answer. That's why I asked it. All right. Shall we wrap this up? Back to the original question. Why does not John simply tell us what Jesus is truly like? Why doesn't he just give us a clear blow by blow? This is who Jesus is. He explains what the eyes of fire mean and so on. Why not as straightforwardly and realistically as possible? A realist picture of Jesus. Why this strange, surrealistic, glorious, awesome, cosmic, but confusing, apocalyptic Jesus? Voice of thunder, face of sun brilliance. Why? We need to wake up. We need to be shaken awake. We don't need more information. We need to wake up to who Jesus is. We don't need the apocalypse to give us a detailed blow-by-blow account of the future either. Had my dad been given a detailed blow-by-blow account of the last few years of his life, but especially the last few months of his life, I don't think he would have been able to stand it. As he came close to his suffocating death by pulmonary fibrosis, he needed a vision of Jesus. Knowing Jesus was walking with him, he didn't need to know the details of the very last of his life. It's not what Dad needed, not what you and I need either. What we need when we get to the end of our lives is to know that Jesus holds the keys. He's got the keys to our lives. This is what gives us real power to live. He's our shepherd. One of the most famous lines of the poet Emily Dickinson is, "Tell all the truth, but tell it slant." What does that mean? That's what the prophets did. It's what John the prophet did. He's called a prophet. If truth comes at us directly, what do? We put up walls. We resist. We self-justify. We say, no, that's not me. Go throw your attack at somebody else. So Revelation's surrealist visions come in at a slant. What does this look like? Let me tell you a story from the Old Testament to kind of illustrate what is going on. Back to another prophet, the prophet Nathan in 2 Samuel 12. King David had just committed a heinous crime. He had forced himself on another man's wife, he had raped her, and then, through a whole series of cover-ups, ended up killing her husband. And now what's he doing? He's justifying himself, he's defending himself. I mean, he's a king. He should be able to do what he wants. It's not, and he's got all these justifications going on. Who's going to tell him what's right or wrong? And then one day his friend, the prophet Nathan, shows up. And now Nathan has to be very careful because Nathan say the wrong thing. Kings just lop off heads in those days. And I can just see David's guard up. Nobody's going to tell him what's right or wrong. So Nathan knows the power of telling it slant. And David's a shepherd, or he was a shepherd. And he thinks of himself still as a shepherd of his people. So Nathan tells a sheep story. Let me read you the story again from Eugene Peterson's version. Nathan, David, I have 2 neighbors in my village, one rich, the other poor. The rich man had a huge flock of sheep and herds of cattle. The poor man had nothing but one little female lamb, which he bought and he raised. It grew up with him and his children as a member of the family. It ate off his plate, drank from his cup. It slept on his bed. It was like a daughter to him. Then one day a traveler dropped in, unexpected, unannounced, on the rich man. He was too stingy to take an animal from his enormous flock, all his own herds, to make a meal for this visitor. So he looked across to the poor neighbor's house, that one little lamb, and he grabbed that poor man's lamb, cruelly slaughtered the beloved lamb, prepared a meal, and set it before his guest. Now, David has been listening quietly up to this point. How do you think the former shepherd responds? Keep reading. David exploded in anger. As surely as God lives, he said to Nathan, the man who did this ought to be lynched. He must repay for the lamb 4 times over for his crime and his stinginess. And now, with the truth slanted inside, Nathan can finally say it direct. Nathan's apocalypse has done its work. You are the man, said Nathan. And David's ears go to his eyes, and he sees with devastating clarity, in stunned shock. He is like knocked down as though dead at the feet of Jesus. Like John, he hears and he turns. That's just what the religious word repents means. It's simply the word turning. He turns, he sees, and he falls. Finally, he sees how horrifically he has sinned. And we know he realizes it because we have this wonderful psalm of his. Have mercy on me, O God, according to your unfailing love. Blot out all my iniquity. Cleanse me from my sin. Create in me a clean heart, O God. Renew a steadfast spirit in me. Don't take your Holy Spirit from me. If one little apocalyptic story could do that for the King David, what could a vision of Jesus do for us? If that little story that the prophet Nathan told to David just opened up his eyes, what could help us to stop sticking our fingers in our ears, putting our hands over our eyes and going like a little kid, la, 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 I don't hear you, I don't hear you. Because that's how we act, don't we, toward God all the time. We use all of our stuff and all of our noise and all the sights to make sure that we are not meditating, we're not listening to Jesus. to make sure that we're not paying attention because God might say something to me? What if the apocalypse could wake us up to God's reality? Slant through the cracks in my eyes, slant through the cracks in my ears, slant through the cracks in my heart, right down deep into my soul, and make us new. May it be so. Let's sing our response to God.